freedom, pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in our great and wonderful country, welcome to another edition of Character Matters. I'm Dr. George Simon. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that plagues our country and much of the industrialized free world, and the problem that I believe poses the greatest threat to our freedom. Because when we are of good character and we are left alone, we create opportunities, we innovate, we do wonderful things, we build great societies. But when we are not who we need to be, there is a constant invitation for government to try to regulate us through statute and thereby restrict our freedom. And it's gotten to the point now where there are so many statutes on the books, hundreds and thousands of them, that at any given time, really, most of us could be inadvertently in violation of several of them. That doesn't make us bad people. It just means that the approach we've taken to solving our ills has been misguided at best. We can't, as the old phrase goes, legislate the morality that we need. That has to come from us. It has to be developed in our character from early on. And only then will we be once again the great country that we have been in times past. We haven't always been great. There are times in our history when we look back, there have been times that we rightfully should hold our heads in shame about what we allowed ourselves to become. But there were also some shining moments, times when our collective character and our national character shone quite brightly. And in those times, we aspired to great things and we achieved great things. That's what it's all about. It's all about character. And so my work on my blog at manipulative-people.com, at another blog that I write for at Counseling Resource, counseling with 2 L's, by the way, resource.com, and in my books, Character Disturbance, In Sheep's Clothing, and the Judas Syndrome. In all those venues, and in the workshops and seminars that I've given over the years, I've tried to carry the message across to folks about how important it is to build character in our young folks, to build it in at an early age, and to take note, particularly of those aspects of our culture that reward, even if not foster or enable, character disturbance. Because there are aspects of our culture today that make it not cool to have character anymore. And we need to make character cool again. And if you're in agreement with me and you want to chime in and have any comments or questions at all, I'd like you to join the conversation at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Join me for a conversation, share a story or two, ask any questions. I have an interesting series of articles that I've been writing on my Manipulative-People blog. And this past week, there was another installment that posted late Friday afternoon, this past Friday, on some commonly misunderstood and misused psychology terms. I get a lot of feedback from folks when I post these articles because many times just seeing a problem correctly. This is true in all the health sciences, but it's especially true in the mental health field, especially when you're dealing with a problem of a social or psychological nature. Just seeing the problem accurately for what it really is many times is the gateway to solving the problem. But so many times we labor under erroneous perceptions that bias our opinions about what's going on in such a way that we lose sight of what we are really dealing with, and we lose all possibility of having good foresight about how to rectify the problem. So this series that I've been posting on the Manipulative People blog has been to clarify some very popular misconceptions, misused terms that have become very commonplace because lay folks are not the only folks that misuse these terms. Professionals of all persuasions misuse these terms all the time, and therefore really complicate the picture and make things even more confusing for folks trying to find their way out of a psychological dilemma. And in this past week's post, I talked quite a bit about the issue of codependence. That's a term that's been around for some time, and it's probably, if not the most misused and overworked psychology term, it's probably among the most misused and misunderstood and certainly overused terms. I also talk about addiction, what it is, what it really isn't. We're going to be talking about that some today. And I truly hope that anybody who's dealt with problems so-called addiction-related and who identify with what we'll be talking about today will call in and share their experience as well. We're also going to be talking about PTSD, anxiety, and self-esteem. Those were the issues that I introduced in the post last Friday on the Manipulative People blog. I've written about them, about all those things in both my books, Character Disturbance and In Sheep's Clothing. Oh, and by the way, I have another announcement. One more foreign publication of In Sheep's Clothing. The Russian edition is out and in print and already being received very well at book fairs in Russia. So it's my hope, frankly. Actually, my publisher at one point expressed some reservations about signing on with a Russian entity to publish this book. And as you might imagine, some of the concerns centered around the policies of Vladimir Putin and some of the oppressive behaviors that he has been perpetrating lately, especially with regard to the Ukraine. Now, I recognize that some people also believe, and I see the point, that there are some legitimate interests that the Russian government may have, especially in the Russian ethnic majority folks who inhabit much of that country. But certainly no one objectively looking at the situation would endorse all of the things that Mr. Putin has done. And to make a long story short, there were some concerns about doing business with this person, and especially seeing as though there's likely to be some difficulties encountered with sanctions with regard to funds transfers and whatnot. But that being here nor there, I thought it was much more important that this groundbreaking book about character and about those covertly aggressive folks among us who manipulate and try to control and who appear on the surface one thing but underneath are quite something else, and all other types of unhealthy characters. I felt that this book really needed to have exposure in Russia and to the Russian people. Maybe in some small way it can be part of the necessary cultural awakening that needs to take place there. Maybe even some of the power brokers within the government will be seen for who they truly are as folks become acquainted with the character descriptions that I give in the book. So who knows? At any rate, I'm happy that the book is now published, and it's just one more in the roster of foreign publications for this almost 17-year now international bestseller, and I couldn't be happier. So if you want to join the discussion today, please give us a call at 718-717-8296. We're going to start with a little exploration into this whole idea of codependence. And then we're going to move fairly quickly into some talk about addiction, because I have not done as many in-person workshops in recent years as I have in the past because of health concerns. But this past Thursday, I actually gave a small presentation at a convention to a very receptive and larger than expected audience about the whole issue of addiction, especially as it applies to sexual addiction. And I gave some case examples, and I gave some prominent cases in the news, and we kind of took these things apart, and we looked at this whole paradigm of addiction. And I have to tell you, the reception that I got for this was really very heartwarming. A lot of folks know all too well what it's like to have someone who has been irresponsible with their sexual behavior, deliberately irresponsible, habitually irresponsible, and unremorsefully irresponsible, hide behind the label of addiction, claim victim status in some way, actually, by slapping that label or gravitating toward that label if it's applied by some unwitting professional. And I heard many horror stories. And I shared some as well, because how I really came to appreciate the need for some clarification on this issue is that I had been contacted by many folks over the years who felt victimized all over again, not just by their unfaithful partners who had really done them in emotionally, by showing their true colors long after the fact of either multiple affairs or solicitations over the internet or what have you, then to be asked to be patient while these folks gave lip service to a so-called addiction program, and yet not really changing their stripes, talking the talk a little bit and not walking the walk of any meaningful change, and enduring that, and then putting up with all that under the belief, laboring under the belief that if they were just patient and they waited this through, that addiction is a tough thing to crack, that relapses are inevitable, that there's too much vulnerability there to pressure the person who's undergoing treatment, and yada, 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 and then waiting by only to realize in the end that they had and could have been out of a dysfunctional relationship much earlier had they just paid attention to their gut. I can't tell you the number of times that this has happened, and I've gotten feedback from folks about this. So that's one of the reasons why I was prompted to write about it in this last post, and one of the reasons why I gave the presentation that I did. And I am so heartened by the reception that it received, because so many folks could identify. By the way, if you're one of those folks who has had someone in addiction-style treatment, doesn't have to be a 12-step program, but some kind of program modeled on either on the 12 steps or some kind of addiction model, whatever the so-called addiction was, whether it was sex addiction, pornography addiction, whether it was a gambling addiction, whatever the so-called addiction was, the label put on the behavior that they cared not to control, and waited patiently for this person to buy into the principles and the steps, participated in the support groups yourself perhaps, got something out of it for yourself, but then witnessed your offending partner or spouse not get very much benefit at all and continue down the same path. If you've had that experience and you want to share it or you want to ask any questions about it, I'd be happy to take your call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Well, I want to talk first about this whole idea of codependence. I've talked about this before, but I really poured my heart out into the article that appeared this past Friday, because despite how much I've written about it, and despite how much I've talked about it, folks still seem to be befuddled and taken in by this paradigm that is so overworked, such an overworked and overused label I don't think I've ever encountered in all my years as a helping professional. This idea of codependency originated, of course, as you might suspect, in addiction research and treatment. It comes out of the notion that when someone is truly chemically dependent, that means they have built up such a tolerance to a substance that normal for them becomes being under the influence of the substance. The body has a natural mechanism to accommodate the presence of a foreign substance. And over time, the phenomenon of tolerance or habituation occurs, whereby the body begins to accommodate the presence of a substance. And when tolerance develops, another feature accompanies it, namely withdrawal. And that is, when the person is without the substance, they feel awful. As a matter of fact, withdrawal carries with it certain key features or certain distinct syndromes that create a lot of distress for the individual who has become truly addicted. And in that respect, we say that a person has become chemically dependent. They become dependent on the substance to function even normally, because without it, they experience these really debilitating symptoms. And because they feel so awful in the absence of the substance, they, of course, use again to feel more normal, which only perpetuates the cycle of building increasing tolerance and therefore increasing dependence. Now, in such cases where someone is truly chemically dependent, their lives are pretty well dominated and controlled by their substance of choice. In other words, the substance runs the show. They are totally dependent on that substance to function. Now, in such family systems where there is a chemically dependent party, many times other family members, especially spouses, within the family system, also have their lives controlled by the substance that the chemically dependent person is using. Their lives are governed by the substance as well. Somebody's got to pay the bills. Somebody's got to take care of putting food on the table, of earning enough money, of seeing to it that the kids are taken care of doing the things that a non-using person would do were they not in the grips of their chemical dependency. And so all of the things that would otherwise be shared responsibilities become the sole responsibilities of the other individuals within the family system. So they become controlled by the substance as well. They don't have as much freedom. They no longer can operate in the way that they were operating long before the substance put a stranglehold on the addicted party. So, in a way, you could say that just as the chemically addicted person has become dependent upon the substance of choice, you could say that the other family members are equally dependent on that same substance of choice. In other words, they are along with, that's what the prefix co means, codependent. And that makes a fair degree of sense. Now, this was a really interesting idea, and it has its place. But boy, has this concept been carried to absolute absurdity. It has been overgeneralized and stretched from its original meaning to the point of true ridiculousness. So has the notion of chemical dependency, by the way. And just in the last couple of weeks, the Centers for Disease Control released a landmark study, longitudinal study, very in-depth study, for the first time boldly proclaiming what many, well, I shouldn't say many, what some of us have known for a long, long time, and that is chemical dependency, true chemical dependency, is rare. Even among the most serious problem drinkers, even among the most serious binge drinkers, substance abuse is not chemical dependency. And the study showed that approximately 90% of even the most severe abusers are not technically, they don't actually qualify for the diagnosis of chemical dependency. So they are not, in the true sense of the word, addicted. They are not addicts. Fortunately, genuine addiction is rare. Unfortunately, abuse is rampant. And here's the problem with the codependency conceptualization. When the aggrieved party in an abusive relationship, and by the way, when people abuse substances, they also tend to, in many other ways, be abusive in their relationships, not necessarily physically violent or physically abusive, and not even necessarily emotionally or verbally abusive. But they tend to be just as irresponsible and therefore abusive with many other things in their life as they are as irresponsible in their drinking patterns. It's part of a characterological predisposition toward irresponsible behavior. And the problem comes when someone who's got a big problem abusing substances and therefore not being a very good partner or not being a very good parent, when that person is viewed as being dependent and the person who views them as dependent views themselves as codependent, you have a real perception problem that biases the person's a view of what's going on in such a negative way that they don't, that the true way out of the situation and the true resolve to the situation is obscured from them. They don't see it. They don't see the situation for what it is. They mistake it for something else. And, God forbid, should they go to a therapist or enter a program that sees it the same distorted way, then the chances are even less that they will ever come to see the problem in the way that they need to see it so that they can see their way clear either to remedy it or to exit the relationship if there's no remedy for it. So that's why I spent a great deal of time in the article this past Friday on manipulative-people.com talking about codependency and what it is and what it isn't. I've heard that codependent label so many times. And in the article, I mentioned a couple of things that codependency is not. And one of the main things that codependency is not, it is not the same thing as emotional dependency. Now, why do I make that point? Well, I make that point for this reason. Not all the time, but a significant amount of time. In abusive relationships where one party is irresponsible, not just in their use of substances, but in the way they manage their affairs with their family, their spouses, their children. Many times when someone is abusive in their character and in their relationships, a person stays because they have an unhealthy sense of their own worth and a lack of appropriate self-regard, stemming from a fair degree of insecurity and emotional dependency. In other words, they will tell you, and they feel it in their heart, that despite it all, they both love and need this other person who's not treating them right in their lives. Or that they so fear to be alone or on their own that they stick it out, praying that it will get better. Even when the person is showing no signs of taking the responsibility necessary to correct the problem. And many times that emotional dependency, many times that insecurity, many times that kind of behavior is labeled codependency, and it is not. But many times it's labeled that way. So, as part of the effort that I made in this last post on the manipulative-people.com blog, I wanted to set the record straight about what codependency is and what it isn't. And I hope I've just done a little bit of that right now. And I don't know how many of you have had experiences like that or can identify with what I've just said, but if you have something you want to share or even a question you want to ask about that, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. And that leads us, the discussion on codependency leads us into a broader discussion on addiction in general. You know, these days, just about every habitual problematic behavior gets labeled an addiction of some sorts. You know, if a person of poor character simply exercises no discretion about their relationships, simply does not consider fidelity an important enough issue to avoid engaging in repetitive affairs and frequent one-night stands. If that behavior persists, many times once caught, and once the proverbial crap has hit the fan, and the relationship partner is not only shocked but dismayed and getting to the point of having enough, the person will claim that they are addicted. Or some misguided soul, seeing their behavior, will simply infer that they are addicted and urge them to seek treatment. But there are always two things critical for an addiction to be an addiction, and I mentioned them earlier. One is tolerance, and the other is withdrawal. Now, I do know, I am not one of those people who says that there is absolutely no such thing as a sexual addiction or a pornography addiction. I am not one of those people. Because frankly, I actually have seen cases of it. But I've also seen egregious examples of where this term, sexual addiction, has been overused and overapplied, and its meaning stretched beyond belief to describe the behavior of impaired characters who simply won't, as opposed to can't, exercise some degree of reasonable judgment and some degree of discretion with regard to their sexual behavior. Some principle-based guidance with respect to that behavior is lacking in these folks. And they are quick to claim addiction status when caught. And they may say all the right things. They may even go into some treatment program or join a support group or join a 12-step group. And they'll say all the right things, and they'll try to make amends, and maybe they'll even secure their relationship for a few years. Maybe the aggrieved party in the relationship will stick it out some more. And then, of course, there'll be the inevitable relapse. And, of course, they'll just claim that's part of the addiction picture. Because everybody knows that addicts have relapses. So it's unfortunate, but this term has become really overworked. And I, in my presentation this past Thursday, I gave several examples, case examples that were altered to preserve anonymity. One of which was a case where I thought a sexual addiction was actually present, where someone had become such an habitual user of porn and and developed such a tendency to use this activity as emotional salve, so to speak, as a way of easing any emotional tension that he had, that he developed a degree of tolerance to the activity and even symptoms of withdrawal. In other words, if denied the opportunity to view porn on the internet and engage in masturbatory activity while viewing the porn, this person was just miserable. This was basically the only emotional salve this person knew, and he had developed quite a tolerance to it. So even though I didn't feel that he met the full criteria for being an addict, I thought that the model, at least in some way, applied to him. I could see how you could in some way consider this person an addict. Then I presented another example of basically just a really bad actor, a really nefarious character who just didn't have much integrity at all, and who displayed that lack of integrity in all of his relationships with all of his spouses, all of his many spouses, whom he never kept very long, understandably. And so I presented that as an example of someone with a true sexual behavior problem, but not an addiction. This was a case of an individual who simply would not, as opposed to could not, control himself, and that was merely a reflection of his less than noble character. And then lastly, I presented perhaps the most egregious example of a person willing to claim victim status and claim addict status, and that is the notorious child abductor and rapist Ariel Castro. For those of you who don't remember, this was the guy in Ohio that kidnapped 3 different teenage girls and held them captive in his home for many years, basically keeping them as sex slaves. I don't know how many of you still remember the case, or remember reading about it, remember hearing about it on TV. I've written about it. I have an article on my Manipulative-People blog called "I Am Not a Monster. Impression Management Ariel Castro Style. You might want to check that out if you want more information on that. And I have an article on the counselingresource.com website that mentions this case, as well as other cases that might make interesting reading for you, and it's called Mental Disorders and Accountability. Is Everyone a Victim? With that victim mentality becoming so widespread these days. Everybody's an addict, everybody's a victim. Well, this notorious monster, true monster, in a shameless attempt at impression management, at his sentencing hearing, wanted us to see him as nothing but a troubled, quote, unquote, sick addict, and not a monster. And I really invite you, if you have the stomach for it, I know it's on YouTube. There are many videos of the sentencing hearing. If you Google Ariel Castro sentencing hearing, you're likely to get taken right to one or two examples. Many of them are in high definition. The audio is not too good on a few sites, but generally speaking, you can make out every word this pathetic character says. And it's enough, really, it should be enough, let's say, to turn anyone's stomach. Because if ever there was a monster, this would be the person. This was a person who was abusive in his relationships. Early on, he was abusive and physically violent with his wife. He mentioned this fact during his sentencing hearing, and how he colored those events is another testament to his horrendous character. And calls attention to the fact that his problem was not one of addiction, but one of character. And he can't help but reveal it in this speech that he gave, this statement that he made at his sentencing hearing. But he calls the beating of his wife something that was overblown, and it occurred only as a matter of the final straw where he simply couldn't take her complaining any longer. He kept begging her to quiet down. He kept begging her not to complain in front of the children. She wouldn't listen, and what was he to do after all? The poor, sick man, what was he to do? And so to paint him as an abuser, he claimed. He had the guts to claim. He had the audacity to claim. The audacity to claim that in the face of this kind of behavior, he was a victim. And he was falsely painted as a monster. He was not a monster. He was not an abuser. And he also claimed that even though he'd done all these horrible things to these three girls, abducted them off the streets, held them captive, many times kept them chained up so they could not escape, especially when he left the house, had the audacity to claim, among other things, that he ran a home where these three captives were that was peaceful and harmonious, and that the girls were never mistreated, and that more times than not, you have to hear it to believe it, folks, more times than not, these captive young girls actually approached him for sex, as opposed to him demanding it as a result of their captivity, or given what was likely to come to them if they didn't exceed his demands. Now, I want to say something else about this because I gave this extreme example of someone who is willing to claim this addict and victim status and who is, without question, truly a monster in character. I gave this example for another reason, though, and there's something else I wanted to really highlight about this case. And I mentioned it in the article. You can read more about it if you go to the article on manipulative-people.com. But I mentioned the fact that most of the time, when you meet someone of impaired character of your life, when you meet someone of poor character, most of the time, when they talk rubbish like this, when they say these things that you find really hard to believe, most of the time, they do not themselves believe this stuff. So while they might say, oh, I never really hurt her, or she had it coming, or I was pushed to the brink, they know that's not true, most of the time. They know they're a brute. They know they've had a problem with their temper since they were yay high. They know they've had trouble keeping themselves under control in all kinds of situations. They know that. So when they're telling you this rubbish, they're not telling you this because they themselves believe it. They're telling you because they want you to believe that. Because if you do believe it, then you may not see them for as bad an actor as they truly are. In other words, if you had a pretty solid understanding of just how reprehensible their character was, you might finally just be out of there. Or you might not have anything to do with them. Or you might correctly have their number and ascribe to them the kind of judgment that you should. And so that's what the game of impression management and manipulation is all about. It's about convincing you to buy a bill of goods. And if they can sell it to you, then they have won the game of impression management. So most of the time, when folks throw out the kind of rubbish that Castro was throwing out, most of the time they don't believe it. They're just hoping that you will believe it because it keeps you from appreciating how monstrous they really are. But sometimes habitual liars get to believing their own lies. And when they truly have come to think in such twisted, distorted ways that they actually believe the rubbish that they spew, folks, these folks are the most dangerous folks you will ever encounter. So if you know somebody who thinks that twistedly, for the most part, remember that they probably don't believe that junk. They're probably just hoping that you do. But if they do, if they talk with such conviction that it's clear that they believe their own I don't even have a word for it, their own ridiculous explanations for things, their own garbage. If they do believe it, you have one option and one option only: run. A person who truly believes that stuff is dangerous, who truly believes that you had it coming, who truly believes that they didn't hurt you that much, who truly believes that they were only protecting themselves, who truly believes that there was no other course, who truly believes after creating havoc day after day after day in their own home that they run a household with peace and harmony. If they truly believe that, get out and get out now. Run for the hills and run as fast as you can. because that's a person who is truly dangerous. Fortunately, most of the time, that BS is just that, BS. And unfortunately, even sometimes when it is BS, unfortunately, some gullible souls buy it. And that's what keeps them in dysfunctional relationships all too long. Sorry to say. But at any rate, I gave that example, and you could read the article about it on the manipulative-people.com website. Also, the other article on Is Everyone a Victim at the counselingresource.com website. I also have many examples of these same kinds of characters and the same kinds of dynamics in all three of my books, actually, in Eat Sheep's Clothing, and in Character Disturbance, and in the Judas Syndrome. Perhaps in Character Disturbance, I give a little bit better treatment to this topic, because I give so many case examples and scenarios where you can see clearly these dysfunctional characteristics at work. And you can see very clearly how these really nefarious characters reveal themselves and their true stripes. But if any of you have something you want to share, an example like that to share, a question to ask, maybe you have a question about the whole concept of codependence, maybe you have a question about the concept of addiction, maybe you have been in a position, as others have, to have someone claim victim status as an addict, only to realize that this abusive person was never really going to change and couldn't possibly have been changed by their addiction treatment program because they never really fit the model to begin with. If you've had such an experience or you have some questions you want to ask, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Now, I'm going to mention something before I forget about next week. I fully plan to be here next Sunday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, as always, for another edition of Character Matters. But I am having some surgery on Friday, and I am not completely sure at this point that I will be up to things next Sunday. So the fact is that you may find out on relatively short notice that you're being treated to a recorded episode of Character Matters next Sunday as opposed to a live program. And is always the case with a re-airing of a pre-recorded program, no live calls will be able to be taken at that time. So don't know that for sure just yet. Won't know it probably until very shortly before airtime on Sunday. So right now I fully plan on having a live broadcast next Sunday of Character Matters, but there may just be the case that we will not be able to do that. And you may get some pretty short notice about that, finding out only at airtime or maybe shortly before. So perhaps if you go to the website, there might be information there too. I forget to mention to folks that you can go to the UCY radio program website, just www.ucytv.com, and all the podcasts are there for you to download. All the shows in the past that have aired are ready for you to download and listen at your convenience on your iPad or iPhone or other electronic device on your computer, wherever. You can always tune in if you don't get a chance to tune in live when the program airs and listen to the topics at hand. I also want to invite folks to take advantage of my written material, my book, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, perhaps the definitive guidebook to understanding the manipulators in your life, how they do it, what makes them the way they are, how to best deal with them, how to set the terms of engagement with such folks that you can empower yourself to the max. And also my book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, which really provides you with insight into all the unhealthy characters in your life, all of those individuals who help make your life difficult because they either think too much of themselves or are too power and control oriented or are too abusive in the manner in which they deal with life and its circumstances to have a healthy, decent relationship. I explain all of these folks, every single personality and character type that you can think of, what makes them the way they are, what really needs to happen if they're going to get any better, why some treatments work, why some treatments just don't work, why some treatments are completely ill-suited to the problem of character disturbance, and why other interventions, although they're better suited to deal with the problem, still take a lot of time and effort to help with the problem. All that's explained to you in Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age. Both are available at your local bookstore or on any of the online resellers such as Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, or iBooks. And also you can download the audiobooks from Audible.com, from Tantor Audio. And then my third book for the Christian audience, The Judas Syndrome, also available on Amazon. All the books, by the way, have a 4.5 to 5-star rating. They're all well-reviewed, well-received. I couldn't be happier about that. But I hope you'll avail yourself of them and also of the hundreds of informative articles on both my own personal blog at www.manipulative, I can't even say that tonight, manipulative-people.com, and also on the counseling resource, www.counselingwith2lsresource.com website. Hundreds of timely articles for you on the topic of character and character disturbance, the phenomenon of our age. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, I'm not sure how it will go this Friday when I have this little surgery scheduled for myself. So there's a chance that next Sunday evening at 7 o'clock I might not be able to be with you live and may not be able to take your calls, but I won't know that until perhaps very, very close to airtime. So if I'm not with you then, you'll be enjoying a pre-recorded broadcast, and I'll be back with you as soon as I can for another live edition of Character Matters. And I hope you'll join the conversation, and I hope you'll continue to be a part of this great effort to make character cool once again and help restore the greatness that was once America by bringing character back into good fashion. So until then, I'm Dr. George Simon. I thank you for tuning in.